This is The Process Shot. I'm Michael. I'm stuck in a haunted movie theater, and I've apparently made it to the end of another year. Well, it's the end of a calendar year anyways. But I guess it's as good a time as any to try and put out a list of the best and worst movies I've seen this past year, starting with whatever new short films I've seen. This year. As a disclaimer, I'll note that this list is gonna name off all the shorts I've seen from worst to best, and they're all shorts that I've seen myself while I've been stuck here. There's bound to have been other short films released this past year that I never got to see or review, but I don't exactly have much control over what I get to see here, you know? It should also go without saying that this list is my personal opinion, and any disagreements should be placed in the comment section to drive up video engagement. Anyways, let's get going. At the bottom of this list is Lunchtime by Matt Starr. It's probably not the worst short that came out this year, but out of everything else I did see, it certainly has nothing that makes it stand out. Up next is Entropy from Joshua Stocker. It's not quite a documentary of an interpretive dance, nor is it really saying anything in my opinion, though I wouldn't say that it's the dancer's faults. Meet the Fossils from Robert Krulvich and Nate Milton is up next. It gets to the point of its environmentalism, I suppose, but by doing so, it forgets how else it could relay this information. After that is Marina Tire from Doron Max Hagay. It has a premise which would have been interesting to see play out, but the problem is that it stops just as it starts. Heart Shot by Marielle Woods is a movie that also has a worthwhile story going on, up until it decides that tonal whiplash is the next best idea and becomes a completely different story. Next is American Scar, directed by Daniel Lombroso, a documentary which isn't exactly afraid to wear its heart on its sleeve, though it does almost congratulate itself for doing so. They're Only Animals, from director Matthew Palmer, is another documentary that seems a bit self-indulgent, though it could be more that it just likes to layer on its messaging very thickly. After that is A Shaman's Tale, directed by Jules Guérin. It's not bad at all, with nothing to really sour the viewing experience. It's just that there really isn't much going on in the short at all. Luck is Alive is a short from Paul Ward that has more focus on its visuals than the ideas that it's putting out, which is unfortunate because they both show that a narrative is entirely possible. Then it's Down Here from Omer Ben Shachar, which does have a narrative and the visuals to match, but it also decides to end itself without really developing the world it creates. Next it's Haloa from Nick Fitzhugh, which is also driven by its visuals and narrative, bringing reality and fiction together in a sense, but not expanding upon that any further. After that, it's Artform, directed by Matt Kleiner. It's a surfing film, but it at least shows a different aspect of the sport that actually seems worth investigating further. Unfortunately, it doesn't. The Backrooms, from Kane Parsons, gives us an interesting world with a clear idea of its rules in reality, but it leaves most things up to the viewer to really understand, and then it's over before anything can really be figured out. Then it's Forgive Us Our Trespasses, directed by Ashley Eakin. This historical drama puts an interesting spin on the oppressions of World War II, and it does tell a pretty thrilling story, but it also tends to move a bit too fast for its own themes and topics. Bump, directed by Maziyar Khatam, is up next, and while it does have some good humor going for it and its minimalist presentation, it also repeats itself for a bit too long. After that, it's Spaghetti Getter from director Jared Lapidus. Similar to Bump, this short drags its main joke on for longer than necessary, though it does at least shake it up with some variety in its parodies of infomercials. Then it's Detached from Emory Allen, another short that sticks to a single and simple idea, one which opens the door to a number of other concepts, then ends just as soon as you get adjusted to its world. Regular, the short from Neta Metzluk, is also a bit like this, but it doesn't exactly do anything to explain its world in the first place. Even so, it is at least unique enough in its art design that it is worth looking at. After that is The Ultimate Space Race from Jake Vegason. It's one part an informative and historical look at scientific progress, and one part a bit of a dismantling of American mythology. I feel like it should have gone one way or the other, instead of both. Pass the Ball is next, directed by Nathan Bowie. It's not much more than an artistic anthology showcasing the works of different animators, some more impressive than others, but the overall package is still pretty fun. Greywater, another short from Daniel Lombroso, is a bit more neutral than American Scar, and certainly just as driven by its environmentalism, not to mention that its initial focus on a local issue, giving way to a larger story, does in fact give it a more interesting perspective. Then it's Erax, directed by Hebru Brantley, a horror comedy that has a pretty simplistic narrative, pitting an aunt and her niece against a bunch of monsters, but it's also got enough heart in its production that it's just plain fun in the end. Next is Training Wheels, directed by Allison Rich. Another short with fun and heart to its name. It's an offbeat romantic comedy that manages to incorporate some higher themes of social anxiety within its story. Then it's Memory of Places from director Hiroshi Kondo, which is more experimental than most movies on this list, but makes its way up here thanks to how it makes more use of its visuals to present an unusual world. Urban Oasis, the short documentary from Ryan Skura, presents a similar look at an entire city, but with less experimentation and more atmosphere and imagery, though it could have benefited from more human stories in my opinion. After that is A Sense of Scale, directed by Roman Di Giuli. Its focus on a world that only exists on a microscopic scale is rather interesting, and even if this is a film made more for its technical production than anything, it certainly makes its case rather well. Then it's Outside, from Inbal Pinto and Edgar Carret, which is interesting in its approach to physical and psychological lockdown, expressing it in a theatrical manner that also conveys the universal nature of these feelings. Next is Hill Hikers, directed by Elizabeth Godard and Mitch DeQuilletz. It's a pretty goofy mockumentary that spoofs several modern trends, from alternative means of therapy to lazy forms of activism, and never overstays its welcome about any of it. Flowers, from Dumas Haddad, is one of the most stylized shorts on this list, presenting a modern fantasy through a unique visual presentation, combining medieval concepts with modern images. Heart Failure, directed by Will Wightman, is one of the other most stylized shorts here, with its musical presentation of a romantic fling gone south, and its soundtrack not only unique to musical films as a whole, but entirely appropriate for the world of the film. The Cliff, directed by Fabrice Lenizet, is more of a showcase for cinematography and art design, but its simpler narrative does at least open it up to many ways of expressing these creative ideas. Next on the list is Blueberries, from Sam Millstein and Kevin Rogers. Despite its more abrasive, surreal imagery, the underlying themes of addiction, relapse, and escape are strong enough that they almost defy the weirdness on display. Then it's The Misadventures of Kid Super, directed by Sebastian Stigui, which is pretty much a clothing commercial at the end of the day, but before that, it does at least put up a great amount of visual stylization and entertainment that could easily translate to other stories. After that is The Interview, from Eno Broadman, a mockumentary that is one part follow-up to a previous film from the director, one part spoof of creative droughts, and one part celebration of finding inspiration through unusual means. Then comes Vom, directed by Brian B. Stray, another mockumentary, this being more traditional in its presentation, as well as its approach to the subject matter. It does repeat its jokes a bit, but the focus on character comedy and world building does keep it interesting. Next is Rare, The Boy Who Cried Swag, directed by Rada Ganti and Robert Lapusky. It's definitely among the most surreal shorts here, but it's a choice that thoroughly explores and expresses a young man's psyche and experiences. After that is Moomin, directed by Zach Dorn, a very personal story told in a unique manner that brings it directly to the viewer in the palm of their hand. I saw it in a theater though, but it still got across anyway. And then we have Nsenene, directed by Michelle Coomber, which takes a look at Ugandan insect farmers, though not so much observing what they do, but seeing how they do their work, and taking in an oral tradition and why they do what they do. And now we're coming into the top 10 shorts of the year. At number 10, it's Art of Grind, a documentary from Dominic Gill about biking culture and its different forms. While it does lean a bit more into visual stylization over raw information and reality, it does still offer a captivating look at two sides of the culture, their initial differences, and the underlying similarities that prove them to be connected by more than their choice of transportation. In ninth is Cool Blue Car, a surreal comedy directed by Alan Resnick. It may seem unusual that a short like this made it this high on my list, but again, this list is my personal opinion. The absurdity on display is what really brings it up here for me, taking a nonsense conflict to extremes, both in the lengths gone to cut a deal with someone, as well as how stalwart they are in their refusal to take no for an answer. After that, in eighth place is North Shore Betty, directed by Travis Rummel and Darcy Hennessy Terrain. It's less a sporting documentary and more a profile of a woman who refuses to let her own limitations stop her from pursuing what she loves. It's definitely more personal than explorative, but it's a story that's certainly worth telling, not only because of Betty's personality and history, but also its more inspirational message. Number 7 is Game Hawker, another documentary, directed by Brett Marty and Josh Izenberg. Man, I watched a lot of documentaries here. Anyways, it too is a profile, though it does weave its subject's personal history as a falconry expert with the greater culture surrounding the sport and the prejudices and limitations set against him, giving the film a bit more of a universality beyond its sports story. In sixth, it's Rot, yet another documentary, this being the most experimental of the bunch. Directed by Joel Penner and Anna Sigrither, its perspective of the decay of plants and animals takes something that likely goes ignored by most people and recontextualizes it in something more philosophical, with visuals that offer a literally new perspective on these ideas and occurrences, and by doing so, giving them new life. Sort of. Fifth goes to A Brief Disagreement, an animated comedy from Steve Cutts. It takes a simple allegory for the futility and absurdity of war and turns it on its head in a creative manner, though it does move so quickly that you might want more once it ends. Even so, the overwhelming nature of the visuals works in its favor, building upon the surreal situations within the short with a seamless flow that fully cements these ideas as endless. The fourth best short of the year was The Duality of Sport, directed by Jeff Alper. It too is a sports documentary, but it's one that almost intentionally avoids its subject's profession in favor of an intimate visual presentation, which looks towards his headspace and personal perspective of sporting itself, and most of all, his seemingly unusual treatment of winning a major event. In third, we have When the Trees Come, a dramatic piece from Berglind Thresdottir. It's a coming-of-age story in a way, showing two different ways that a child may be confused by what is happening to themselves or to others, yet still showing how they are able to maintain their own sort of control over whatever is to come. It's also a great showcase of a hazy and foreboding landscape, one which breeds uncertainty but still holds beauty and wonderment. Next up in second place is You've Never Been Completely Honest from Joey Izzo. This documentary crosses archival material with new reenactments and animation to help illustrate a cruel sort of group therapy, bringing it to full life and showing its coldness in detail. The clashing visuals help to recreate the confusion felt by participants, as does the editing, which only further emphasizes the suddenness of events and the helplessness of the victims. Finally, the best short of the year, at least in my opinion, is There's No End, directed by Matthias Evangelista. Yes, it's another documentary, but it's still this high for a reason. This film is truly intimate, with a first-person point of view into the life of an artist who has chosen to focus more upon his home and family life over his career. And the movie brings us into his own headspace without difficulty. It's a rather interesting, if not unique, perspective of the world, driven by sight and sound, in a way showing how his artistic frame of mind is still in use, but now being expressed through a different means. Most of all, it's a very affirming film that ultimately finds happiness not so much through short-term successes, but long-term legacy. And, well, that's it for this list video. If you liked it, leave a like. If you have something to add, leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel for more lists. Well, not constantly, unless you're really into list videos. It's still pretty much gonna be reviews around here for a while. At least until I finally start making shorts.